Good evening and welcome to our book study here at New Covenant House. We do this every week and we are studying Christian Anarchism by Alexander Christoyanopoulos, who wrote it as his doctoral thesis, I think a little over 10 years ago or so. We are currently in chapter 6. Actually, this will be our last session in chapter 6. And tonight we're going to be talking about examples of Christian anarchist witness in what he calls modern day times. And it begins in 1838 with Garrison. I don't recall much about him, but it says that he was only a Christian anarchist. And but he was mostly known for what he for a paper he wrote called A Declaration of Sentiments, which was submitted to a conference in I think 1838, and that's his notoriety really, because everything else about him is not anarchist at all. He supported a presidential candidate and supported the the use of force in the Civil War, and it turns out that his point was always the abolition of slavery. It has nothing to do with anarchism. So that's all I'm going to say about him. The next person up is a fellow named Ballou, and he was the founder of Hopedale Community. He's here mostly because he was corresponding with Tolstoy towards the end of Tolstoy's life. And he's not really that significant either, because he never described himself as an anarchist. But many anarchist writers say that his socialism resonates strongly with the Christian anarchist vision of community outlined in chapter 5. So he established this farm, but it never really lasted. And that's a pretty common theme. And without professional and otherwise explicit anarchists. Yeah, so it doesn't have a profession of or otherwise explicit anarchist identity. So enough about that. Then we come to Tolstoy himself, who is the main character in these writings. He wrote a lot. I don't believe that he actually ever identified himself as a Christian anarchist. He was definitely reluctant to do that, but he may have done it. And people have also called his philosophy for Tolstoyanism, and he kind of didn't really want to identify with that either. So I think he just had an aversion against labels, which I do myself, so that's probably why I think that way. Labels are problematic because although they are a convenient shortcut to tell people what something is about, it almost always misses out on something. So I think we have to be careful with using labels on things. He was criticized for still living in his mansion, but he did strip his house of luxuries. He labored on the land. So he says that those people criticize him as I'm doing the best that I can, and that's pretty much all we can do. But he did a lot of writing, and that is his most significant contribution. And he was criticizing the Tsarist regime, obviously. And later on, just before his death, he also had issues with the Bolshevik Revolution, which was also problematic for him. So most of his life he was censored, and only kind of survived because of his notoriety as a writer, and also if the various regimes did not dare to arrest him, and he almost got arrested, but I think some intervention uh, kind of avoided that for him. So his contribution beyond the writings is that he had followers, and who they tried to implement his philosophy in what they call Tolstoyan colonies. Um, Tolstoy was kind of critical of them a little bit because they tried to make him more than he wanted to be. He said that um, Tolstoy is calling for is not for others to follow him, but to follow the universal truth, which was best articulated by Jesus. So he didn't really want to be the center of attention here. He criticized Tolstoyan colonies for having few benefits for humanity at large, focused as they were on the inner life of the community rather than the whole of humanity. So, and we are guilty of the same thing here at New Covenant House. We don't really have um, the capacity to go much beyond our own four walls here. We can try to get ourselves established. We can't really do much beyond that. But this is different in my hope that someday we will. So a lot of famous people came and visited Tolstoy in his house there in Russia. Um, and some people in throughout Europe and elsewhere also followed him and tried to make things happen along these lines, but they all failed. The only one that's still around today that I know of is the Catholic Workers' Movement. We don't know for sure that Dorothy Day and Peter Morin actually um, follow Tolstoy. It's kind of doubtful, but the third one less known of the founders, Hennessy, did. So there is definitely some influence there. And Hennessy was kind of more confrontational than the other two. So that is his contribution to the Catholic worker cooperative movement. So there was a lot of um, adversity to the Tolstoy version of Christian anarchism, and so it never really came off the ground as the way we would like it to have been. So um, yeah, so that's pretty much all I'm going to say about Tolstoy, really. Um, the one thing that we could mention is that his most important influence was on Mahatma Gandhi, who, as you probably all know, he opposed the British occupation of India, and he used nonviolence as his tool for doing that. His contribution is that he kind of, what it says is it is ironic that it had to take a non-Christian, Hindu, Gandhi was a Hindu, to teach us such a valuable lesson on Christianity's true way. Christians have a Hindu to thank for putting the cross back into politics. So that is why we so often mention his contribution. But he did not always follow Tolstoy's anarchist conclusions, so we can at best describe them as imperfect. Another one of his followers, that was actually a follower of Gandhi, was Martin Luther King, who stepped up the force a little even more. So he definitely became uh, completely political in his approach there. And you have to say that these protests that he orchestrated were seriously confrontational, probably not the way Tolstoy would have liked it to be. So enough about Gandhi, Tolstoy, Martin Luther King, and let's look a little bit about the Catholic Workers' Movement, because that appears to be the only really significant example that we have that still exists to this day. As I said before, it was founded by Dorothy Day and Peter Morin, and I also hear that a fellow named Hennessy was instrumental in doing that, or at least he was influential in the establishment of it. Beyond really just being a community, they also got seriously involved in social justice. They supported workers' strikes. They contributed to picket lines, contributed to various contemporary injustices. They were staunchly pacifist during the Second World War. They were anti-nuclear and anti-Vietnam War. Um, and then it says that Hennessy's impact on Catholic workers' movement was to make its protest more confrontational. And one of the things that they are known for is their civil disobedience, which is also significant in Poor People's Campaign by Will Barber today. They often let themselves get arrested when they are out there protesting. I don't know that Tolstoy would have approved of that. Jesus himself, in the cleansing of the temple, was kind of forceful, but I don't know that he went around protesting people. You could say that the triumphant entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday was sort of a protest, sort of a demonstration, but we don't really know for sure what we would call it. At some point, the followers of Jesus there were reprimanded by some people who apparently had the power to do that, to criticize them for being too rowdy, and he should rein them in. But of course, he wasn't going to do that. So the main thing that the Catholic workers do is they operate houses of hospitality, and they operate farms around in a lot of many different places, not just in North America, but also around Europe and Asia. This says that there are over 170 Catholic worker communities in the United States and Canada, and this numbers are 10 years old, so that could be dramatically different today. So the things that are important to notice about Catholic workers is that they base their communities of love and care and hard work and social protests and civil disobedience. So those are the hallmarks of Catholic workers. And then he goes into talking about some publications and some online communities, which I'm not going to talk about because they apparently are either defunct or on their way to be defunct. The only type of guy I want to mention is Dave Andrews in Australia. He gets involved in all kinds of local initiatives, and he also established this Plan B. He wrote the book Plan B, B as in BE, the to be, because the subtitle is to be the change you want to see in the world, and it's a play on the words beatitudes, and is an attitude of being. So he's a little bit interesting, and he's still working on that. By the way, he's not gone away, but I don't know that his followers really can be described as Christian anarchists. Really, he may be, but he doesn't really say that. But he has the tendencies to do that, to be in that category. So the last paragraph here in the book, in this chapter, says that what we really have is a bunch of imperfect and incomplete illustrations of what Christian anarchism really is. And the only one that's actually somewhat substantial and solid is the Catholic Workers' Movement. So I'm going to say we are pretty much at the end of the chapter here, except to say maybe that the only place that can really be recognized as a Christian anarchist is the early church, and it didn't take long for that to be spoiled even in the first few centuries of its existence, and it got really bad during the Middle Ages. And we can't really see that the kingdom of heaven has been materialized here on earth just yet. And the conclusion, which we're going to start digging into next week, should explain why that is. So it's going to be it's a big chapter, and it'll take us at least a few weeks to get through that. So I look forward to that, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for coming.